A startup CFO knows he has to write a business plan. He also knows when it hits the ground, it's going to be wrong. But it helps him to rethink everything. So this is why I'd briefly like to go through all the elements of a pitch deck, which a startup CFO has to go through, has to think through in order to cover all main aspects and give you some advice from my experience, what can go wrong, what is important in those areas. There are a couple great pitch decks out there. So if you go to that source, to really legendary startup pitch decks, and what you can learn from them, you find like Facebook and Airbnb, LinkedIn, some pitch decks, and you can look into them and try to understand what they made. I mean, we all know those businesses, and it's interesting to get a feeling how they made their presentation. And they covered the main aspects, and there are a couple of aspects to think about, and I'd like to go through these aspects briefly. The first thing these pitch decks normally do is, besides like the company overview, which you normally give if your company is already existing. If not, you don't need that. You start with some mission and vision. You'd like to get the reader involved. I'm gonna change the world in that extent. I'm gonna make it a better world, whatever. So start with something people can lose their heart in. And then this is your vision. By the way, because your vision is probably gonna remain more stable than your product, for example, maybe also more stable than the market. But the vision is the thing. Why are you doing that? This also, if you read the book Start With Why, it really helps you to answer that question. Why are you doing that? And if you can answer that question, the other side will be convinced in a different way. And then the next thing is the team, because you remember investors in many stages, they invest in the people first of all. Everything else might change, but the team might be the same, or ideally is the same over time, even everything changes. And so inform about the team, show that you're bright people, you're good entrepreneurs who can think everything through, and it's fun working with you. So if you can start with that, it's a great start into a pitch deck, first of all. And then you can go deeper into details. And going deeper into details is catching up with the vision and making that typically like problem solution thing. Most startups should start with a problem. I mean, there are a couple of visionary people out there. Steve Jobs is definitely a very visionary personality. However, from all of the entrepreneurs' experience, in 99 of 100 cases, startups start with a problem they'd like to solve, and out of that problem space, they might establish a different vision. But you start, in many cases, they start with a niche problem, and out of that space, they develop something great. And this is what you also say, okay, what is the problem? Why is it important? Why do people have that problem? Because if people have a problem, they are much closer to accepting a solution than if they don't have the problem. You have to convince the people to buy something from you. And you can always create a market, but in most cases, it's a lot easier to start with a very well-defined problem. So well-define that problem and then show you can have a solution for that. That solution might be a ready-made product coming into place right now, might be an idea for the solution. Maybe you can also tackle the timing issue at that moment here, because if you can spend some thoughts on why do I have this solution right now, and why hasn't this solution been out there for the last 5 years? It's also important for you to know that timing-wise, you're at least not too late. You might be too early still, but if you say, okay, I saw that problem, I can solve it right now because the new technology fits into that, right now, then timing-wise, you can give your investors, potential investors, a better feeling, also by yourself, a better feeling that you're in the right timing right now. So that's the next step. And this is to some extent starting to build the vision bottom up out of the problem, out of a solution. Out of that niche, you can build a big business. I remember many startups started with a niche. Even Mark Zuckerberg started with a very well-defined problem on Harvard campus. Very good solution, and then they built something big out of that. And that something big is the market opportunity. So there is a market for that, because it's not only a problem with a solution, but people are also willing to pay for that, and it's a market which is growing. Sometimes there are still problems, but problems for markets where people tend to be too old to use your product long enough to let the market grow, for example. So it's a lot more interesting to be in growing markets, growing segments, because then you can really start playing a role, establish yourselves, take away some market share from others, and they still have positive things to report to their investors. So there has to be a market opportunity, which is the next question of home solution, but there's also a market because people are willing to pay and they are able to pay. And these are my first potential customers. Remember the business called model canvas, where you come from the right side into the left side. So if you have like the problem and the solution, but the solution you have your value, and then you think further about your customers and the partners you might want to have to tackle those customers. Technology is always a backbone. I said that timing-wise. If you can say this is new technology, the technology helps me to tackle it right now. It's good. So you have to have a sense about the technology, and if you can combine that with some timing issues, that's always perfect. Whenever you start your new business, and that's the next slide here, you will have competition. Even if you have a great new product and no one else has this product, there is competition for your solution. When people didn't have the automobile, they got from A to B with horses. And now we have the automobile, and maybe people will do that in different ways in the future. So there's always a different solution to the problem. Think about that solution. On the one hand, on the other hand, there also might be competition in terms of other companies thinking about the exact same product. This is good news, by the way, because if there's a market with competition, it shows that the market is interesting. So it's not necessarily bad news that there's competition out there. It shows there's it shows there's a market, and actually, if you have a better execution, you can be the one being the winner in that market. Remember Facebook, MySpace was there 6 years before, and Facebook came 6 years later and overtook the entire market, at least right now, except China maybe. So competition is always out there. Never say there's no competition. There's always other solutions, and even if there's competition in your market with your specific product, it's to some extent good news. Show traction. Remember what we said with business angels. Even in the early stages, you tackle a business angel, you want to show him that you have something, some proof for your business model. You have the first customer, you have the first prototype, you took your family and friends' money, you invested that in the right way in order to show traction. This is, by the way, And for a startup CFO, when you remember the strategy and then the milestone thinking, one of the first milestones, always using the money in order to build some kind of traction, ideally in the important fields investors and also yourself would like to see that this proof helps you to reduce the uncertainty. That's the traction you want to show. And then you can rethink the entire business model again and explain to investors how your business model works, how the core of the business model works. And it's not that you haven't tackled these parts of the business models. The business model at the very end, this chapter 12 or this part 12, helps you to understand the consistency between the two sides. And consistency, by the way, is a very important aspect I have seen with some business plans and other investors probably also have seen when it comes to the marketing plan. And entrepreneurs build a marketing plan and the great hockey stick and sales are going up and so on. But sales personnel stays the same, which you can see if you look into the financials in the cost structure. That means there's no consistency in the plan. And this is really important. This is a moment where you can really see the consistency between like marketing and financials. If you say, okay, if I have higher sales, I also need higher expensive for marketing. But this also holds true for the entire business plan. Always try to show consistency. And stepping back one slide, the business model very much helps you to put together all the 11 parts that we've seen before into one, not all the 11, but many parts of the 11 ones we've seen before, to put it in one model and to rethink the consistency between these elements, between the right side of the customer and the left side of the maybe production of the value proposition, which is in the middle, and also to the numbers which you can find at the bottom. So the consistency aspect is also one of the aspects which really shows where you as a startup CFO can show you really thought it through, because these are questions investors love to say, okay, what does it cost to buy a single customer? What's the customer acquisition cost? And then they you give them an answer, and then they look into your financials and want to see that exactly that answer is reflected in the financial at the very moment when you have X number of customers. And if you're able to build that consistency, they're convinced you're a good entrepreneur. And at the very end, in the pitch deck, you can put the ask in there. You can say, okay, I like to have this amount of money, and this is what I'm looking for. Maybe you don't want to put it there, because money can vary. I mean, some investors tell you, let's take more into your business because I'm convinced you need more and so on. And that's a discussion you can do. So some leave that out. But at least you have to be also prepared for that, because some entrepreneurs ask you that and say, okay, how much money do you need? How much do you want me to invest? And then you might want to have an answer. So now it's a little boring going through all these 5 slides of the elements of a business plan, but I hope I gave you some more information from my experience, what I consider to be important for a startup CFO. If you take all that into account, you're very well prepared for an investor pitch.